I have to tell you, oops, he did turn the mic on. Maybe if people hear me out there and be so interested. I have such a loud voice. When I was teaching high school many years ago, I taught at a girls' Catholic high school, you know, where they wore the skirts and the knee socks. And they had me in one classroom that had 4 collapsible walls. They could make it into 4 classrooms. And the other teacher said, Zarzana needs his own classroom. He's so loud. So anyway, thank you for coming. It's a small group, but small is good. I'm Jim Zarzana. I write under James A. Zarzana, and I think I gave you all my card. And I'm just going to start with a couple stories because I'm really, in the end, the storyteller. Then we'll...
I got mine already.
Oh, you got yours already? Okay, great.
You bet I do.
Oh, you bet. All right. So I was thinking about it this morning, and the first story I really have to tell you is, this is my wife, Mary Ann. We're both associated with Southwest Minnesota State University, which is in Marshall, Minnesota. I have retired from there to write full-time. Mary Ann's director of creative writing and a poet and a documentary maker. And we're happy to be in Fargo. We had a great dinner last night, a wonderful ride up. We did not hear the storm at 4 this morning, but we thought it was coming. But when we walked into the room last night, this very room, which was packed with pirates and boarding parties and everything, and I looked at Mary Ann and said, am I supposed to talk in this room tomorrow? Holy shit, you know? I mean, I prepared for 35 max, you know, so anyway, that's one thing. And then, so we were living in Pennsylvania, and I was teaching in Pennsylvania, and, you know, the East Coast is pretty formal, and so I was teaching a sport coat and a tie and a button-down shirt, and so things were not working out in Pennsylvania, and I got an interview at Marshall, Southwest Minnesota State, in Marshall. So I flew out, and I'm at the Best Western right there across the street from the school, and I'm supposed to 9 o'clock meet the chair of the department. And so I get up, and I put on a blue shirt and a tie and a blue blazer and gray slacks with a crease, you know, and black wingtips that I had shined. And I walk over to the English department, and the chair is there, and he's got a flannel shirt, faded, you know, jeans with no knee, and a pig belt buckle, a big and I just thought, these people are never going to hire me, you know. So I kind of felt like that last night when I walked into this room. And the end of that story is they did hire me because we have a mutual friend who's retired from Notre Dame, and we called her up and said, Sonia, what do you know about Southwest Minnesota? She goes, well, my mother grew up there, you know, and she filled us in and all kinds of stuff. And she said, but if you go to Southwest, you got to make sure that they take you out to Ghent, a little small town, and you go to the Silver Dollar Bar and Grill in Ghent, because it's the first bar to open in Minnesota after Prohibition. So at the end of the day, by then I'd loosened my tie and taken off my sport coat, but they said, oh, we want to take you to dinner. And I said, well, I've been told you have to take me to the Silver Dollar Bar and Grill in Ghent. And that was their watering hole. They went there every Friday, so it's like, that's how I got the job. So anyway, hi, come on in. So anyway, what I thought I would do today, because I have not been to this workshop before. This is me, just so if you're bad with names and everything. So we were at CoreCon and we were at Minicom, and several of them have actually kind of formal panels, and I sort of thought when I submitted that that's what I would be presenting. And I don't mean to say you guys aren't formal, but I prepared a more formal talk, and I'm not going to do it that way, but I do have a handout. But let me explain what I was after with the title and everything. So I write dystopian fiction. The 2 books up here, Marsco Dissident and Marsco Triumphant, set in near future, so they're speculative fiction. The first one begins in 2092, second one takes up about 2098, 97, something like that, right after the storyline of the first one. And I really am very, very concerned about political science fiction or speculative fiction. We were just in LA at a conference, which was more academic even than any of the CoreComs or anything, which is AWP. And the last session I went to was on speculative fiction, and I thought, well, that's right up my alley, that's what I write. And I went there, and all they talked about was fantasy, and it wasn't a very good panel. They all knew each other. They were zinging in jokes back and forth. Anyway, I think you all recognize the monsters from the id. If you're a sci-fi fan and you like classic sci-fi and you like classic sci-fi movies, you all know the movie Fantastic Planet, and which is just celebrating its 60th anniversary, I think. I saw something up on Facebook the other day about, and it's been making the buzz on the internet. So I like science fiction that is head-oriented and not so much stuff that's interested in zombies or The Walking Dead, and that's the rage, it seems to me. We had a group of our faculty did a panel about a year ago now, year and a half ago. And you weren't on sabbatical, so spring a year ago. And they talked about The Walking Dead. And it was very interesting, but it was like, come on, give me a break here. One of our psychology professors talked about what part of the brains were still functioning in The Walking Dead, where they couldn't talk, but they could walk, and they could do this, they could see, and he's going through all the brain parts. But that stuff just, frankly, and if it's your stuff, if you love it, if you write it, I don't mean to put anybody down, but it just bores me, because after a while, it's like, why are we watching this? These people don't die, they keep coming back. I mean, it's sort of why I gave up reading Game of Thrones. I just like, come on, I mean, I want a story, and I want characters that are challenging the status quo. I mean, that's just what I'm after. So what I wanted to do today was, I got a hand, I'll give it to you in just a second, former English professor, so of course I had a hand up. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I see are three main areas that science fiction should, not should, because I don't want to should all over myself, but that to me personally are the areas that I like to see science fiction go. And then just quickly look at some of what I think are the classics in that area, very briefly, because I want you guys to kind of fill in the blanks. I figure some of you are probably more up on the TV than I am, more up on the current movies. I saw the Star Wars movie, but I don't go see a lot of sci-fi, really. So anyway, I didn't include fantasy, so if you want to talk about Harry Potter, you want to talk about Lord of the Rings, that's all fine with me, but I didn't put it on my list, so I just wanted to say that. I mentioned already Forbidden Planet, and I was already talking about the zombies and The Walking Dead and everything. You can use the Walking Dead motif really effectively. And again, in that classic movie, this is the 100th anniversary of World War I, so there's a lot of stuff going on about World War I. July 1st, 2016 will be the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of the Somme, and more British soldiers died in that 24-hour period on July 1st, 1916, and in some cases an entire war. So it was just a fiasco. They got up, walked into German machine guns, they got mowed down, and they kept doing that for like 24 hours. It's horrific. The French film J'accuse, I Accuse, actually started filming in 1918 before the war ended, and used real French soldiers and pictures of French wounded as part of the film. They didn't know what this guy was going to come out with. It was this incredible anti-war film. And at the end of the film, one of the main characters is hallucinating. And in that hallucination, all the war dead rise up out of the graves and begin to chase people that are alive. And, just like their bandages and their wounds and their old broken weapons, and they're chasing people. And it was like, why did you send us to do this? Europe, 4 years of just carnage. And they just kept getting out of the trenches and getting mowed down, and then they invented poison gas and these exploding artillery shells and better machine guns, just horrific. And so, you can have that motif for The Walking Dead, and it can be incredibly powerful. And so I don't want to say you can't do that, but it seems to me, and again, I'm just being a judgmental English professor here, that it can be overdone with zombies and whatever. And I'm not going to talk about fantasy, but just in the J.R. Martin sequence, how many of the characters are murdered off and then come back, and it just after a while you just want to go, well, why? There's got to be a point to this. So that's what I wanted to sort of set that. And what I think is missing in a lot of sci-fi and speculative sci-fi today is three big issues. Okay, so if you think for a minute of two classics, they're both pretty old, but 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, if you go back and read the book, and The Old War of the Worlds, again, not the movies, but if you go back and read the book, That's one little group there, War and Its Consequences. I'm just using these titles broadly, and we can stick all kinds of other things in a second. And then if you think of Brave New World in 1984, if you think of those two, again, the movies, not the movies, the books, and I like to talk about them in terms of, just to kind of set the stage, and I'm going to get you guys talking, religious abuse of power, especially religious power and political power. And then if you think of Dragonfly, that's supposed to be Frankenstein and Dracula. How it came out as Dragonfly, I don't know. But if you think of Frankenstein and Dracula, and then they tend to be abuse of science. And so if we kind of think of those three terms, sort of war and its consequences, abuse of power, especially religious and political power, and then abuse of science, then there's sort of three broad categories that I think, speculative science fiction, movies and books. I'm principally talking about movies and books. So here's my handout for you. I just sort of, there you go, there you go, there you go. Would you like one? Or are you going to take my mic off? Oh, okay. All right. So this is almost in a way, Zarzana's lists of favorites, so, pardon about that. But are some of you familiar with Canticle for Leibowitz? Are you familiar with that one? Walter Miller is the author that is published at the end of the 1950s, so it's a very, very Cold War book. I mean, the Cold War is just dominating everything. I grew up in the 50s. We did duck and cover drills. I grew up in California near a SAC, Strategic Air Command attack base. So they had the big bombers waiting 24 hours, just like I guess Minot had some, and Rapid City, but a lot of people in the Midwest did duck and cover drills because of tornadoes. Sacramento, you're not going to get a tornado, you get an earthquake maybe. But we did duck and cover because the Ruskies were going to blow the shit out of us, So, but it's a wonderful book. If you like history and then you like sci-fi, it starts 600 years after the atomic wars killed about 90% of the world's population. And it's roughly like the Middle Ages. And then it skips ahead, it's like three novellas. It skips ahead to the 1200s, it's like the early Renaissance, and it skips ahead to the 2400s, and it's like modern times, they're on the verge of another war. Leibowitz had founded a monastery in the desert to copy manuscripts, because all of writing, if you wrote, after the war, people thought, you brought this war on us, and so everything. Come on in. Nothing I did so far will be on the quiz, so you're okay. Oh, he's just reporting in, so okay. So anyway, it's just a powerful book. I taught a course toward the end, just before I retired, and I used it, and I started out by apologizing to my students. It's this Cold War, it's da-da-da-da-da. And then Putin invaded the Ukraine, and I thought, well, thanks, Vlad. You just made this book, timely again. So there's that. You've probably all seen Dr. Strangelove, right? You've seen the movie, old classic movie. The subtitle about how I learned to love the bomb is the subtitle of that movie. On the Beach, the book and the movie both are just chilling. Now again, sometimes when I say the movie, they've done a remake, and I'm talking about the Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner. Yes, I'm in my 60s, okay, so I'm sorry about that, but I have a long view of these things. But the book is just incredible because it's so clinical and technical. The submarine went here and it surfaced, and they're still radioactive, when you can't live there. So Ender's Game, some of the more contemporary. I actually met him. What's his name? Scott. Slaughterhouse-Five, again, both the movie and the novel. Dune, I just reread Dune a while ago. It's a little aged. It's a little fuzzy around the corner because of the way he treats women. There's been a huge change in the way probably women should be treated. But anyway, it reads well, and it brings. It could actually go down in the abuse of religious power too in the other section. And I thought of the Star Wars, the original trilogy, and the latest one. The what were supposed to be 1, 2, and 3. I don't like to count as anything. as any. My biases come through real quickly, okay? I just want you to know that. I didn't think the first three were very good. I mean, what he made as, you know what I mean. You all know what we're communicating, ooh. But, but what bothers me about them is that in the end, it's always a violent answer. In the end, it's always a battle. And again, I'm sorry, I'm a political liberal. There's just so many times that just going to shoot it up is not necessarily the best way to be. It may be the most expedient, it may end a situation temporarily, but there's got to be huge choice. Now, you don't put that into a movie. You just don't have suddenly Luke Skywalker turning into Gandhi at the end of a movie and it would work. It's just not going to work, and I understand that. But anyway, so it seems like that's one huge category that we can go into. The abuse of power and the abuse of political power and everything. I recently taught, it's been out a long, long time, but I hadn't read it, but I just recently taught about 2.5 years ago, A Handmaid's Tale and then the movie. And, just if you're not familiar with it, not your Sunday go to meeting kind of people take over, but uber beyond the pale. Conservatives take over, and the women are just hardly see them, and the garb that they have to wear, and it's just a crushing tale of male dominance run wild and then justifying it through religious and political means. It's just very, very powerful. And the movie is stunning. The actress who played in it, and I forget her name now, but she was killed in a skiing accident. And she was also in Disney's second Parent Trap, and she plays the middle-aged wife and everything. So she doesn't just play horrific films, but powerful film. Fahrenheit 451, it still works, it's a little bit dated. The Time Machine, I threw in a really, really old one. Because the world that he goes to in the Time Machine is a world that's been destroyed because of war and everything like that. So it actually can go in a couple different spots. The Hunger Games series, Mars Goes Off. Had to throw in my own work. I do want to remind you that one major reviewer did say it reads like the headlines ripped out of today's papers and compared it to 1984. But the abuse of power, and I won't go on and on about it here, but the power is a corporation. Marsco is a giant corporation that takes over, and they run the world because they run the computers, and you can only get on the computer with their permission. And it's not that far-fetched, really. And I thought the Star Trek, I really liked the Wrath of Khan and the Voyage Home, but again, religious power and political power and all that sort of come in there. And then abuse of science. Never Let Me Go. Ishiguro, do you know he's a living writer? A lot of people I teach are dead, but this guy is alive, and he was born in Nagasaki, in Japan in 1950. So 5 years after Nagasaki was bombed, his family came to Britain. He grew up British. When you see him interviewed, you can just Google, these days you can just Google, you can listen to him on the internet and all that sort of stuff. He's got a British accent, very educated, polished British accent. He's Japanese British, But Never Let Me Go, it's first-person narration. It's told through the point of view of one of the children who were raised in a special school, and they don't know why they're so special, but they know they were cloned. And then it turns out they were cloned for their organs, so that they could be surgically removed. There's the book and the movie, and both are very, very powerful. Fantastic Planet, I already mentioned. Monsters from the Id. I think, in my mind, too much of the violence that we see as entertainment has detached consequence from the violence. And the pivotal scene in Forbidden Planet, not to record for if you're not familiar with it, but when they realize the monsters are coming from our ids, from our own imagination, just to me very, very powerful. Old movie, another one, Boys from Brazil, about cloning and recloning Adolf Hitler, kind of I was single once, and long before I knew Mary Ann. We've been married, it'll be 33 years coming up, so this was a long time ago. And there was a young woman on campus I was doing English, obviously, and she was doing Spanish and English, and she was going to go be a missionary in South America, and I asked her out on a date and took her to boys from Brazil. It's like, I had one date with her. It did not work. If you see the movie, think of that story and you'll understand. The Lathe of Heaven, early Ursula Le Guin, and the use of psychology, but the abuse of a patient, and then the trying to create a perfect world, and every time you try to create it, it gets imperfect very quickly. And whatnot. There was a PBS made movie for TV, actually through Portland PBS. She lives in Portland, and they did it, which I think is better than they did a big blockbuster movie that kind of bombed. Blade Runner, again, I love the movie. The book just kind of, to me, I just couldn't get into it, but that's to Android's Sheep, yeah. I didn't like the narrative style. Just kind of Jurassic Park. I just reread and rewatched Jurassic Park, and again, science is there for the advancement of us. I think we all have cell phones. We all kind of probably got vaccinated. We get cold, we can go to a good doctor, or however we want to seek that. Our communications, our automobiles. We were just in Europe, fly across the Atlantic. Think how long it took one guy to get across the Atlantic, whatever it was. And then they still lost his luggage. Gets to Paris, no luggage, just a bad joke, okay? You know what my students had to put up with. But Jurassic Park, and I love that scene where the mathematician, Malcolm Greenblum, I think, or Blum, whatever the actor's name is, where he says to him, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, but you haven't paid for the knowledge you're using. You've just stolen it. They know how to clone something to make better green beans or something, and you clone frog DNA with dinosaur DNA and make these dinosaurs, and you didn't own it. You just kind of stole. And I just think, that's a very, very important part of the book. It's in the movie, it's mentioned in the movie, but just that aspect of it. So anyway, those are my three categories, and I will very quickly shut up now. There's my two books, but it's on my business card. I do have a website that's kind of a general website. I do have one dedicated to the Marsco Saga, and you can go to Facebook if you wish, and I do have a Marsco Saga Facebook page, and I put some things up there about space, real space. I put some things up there about books and my books and where I'm going to be, and I put some things up there about politics. And anyway, you can take a look at that. But if I made any sense, and if you guys have been reading something lately and you like something and there's something I missed and you want to say, oh, why didn't you add this or add that? What's your pleasure here? Yeah.
Well, the only thing that I can think of, I will admit, I'm usually a book reader then movie watcher, but for one specific movie, I saw the movie and I haven't read the book yet, The Giver. And I was kind of looking at the categories and it kind of fits into all three in different stages. Because The Giver, the whole point of the taking away of the emotions and the love and all that was because that was the consequence of war and bloodshed in the day. And then the abuse of power is that those that are trying to get away from that are being hunted, are being, trying to be stopped from changing what they know. And then the whole abuse of science, using the drugs to stop the emotions and stuff. That was the only one I could think of that was, it fits kind of in all three in different parts.
Yeah.
Parts of it.
Overlap is not a not a problem.
Yeah, and I liked the way it kind of flows from one to the next too. So I like that it kind of fits all three a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Very often used in high school. I teach a lot of taught because I'm not teaching anymore in a formal sense, but a lot of future high school teachers, and they often say the students really love it. I mean, what a better metaphor for high school than taking away your emotions and not letting you think, than high school, which is a necessary transition. So, were you going to add?
Yeah, I was hoping to add. I was just thinking that unlike a lot of the books you have listed here, where war is considered a positive outcome, The Giver and is basically talking about the consequences of war and how we can't, if we feel as much as we did when during times of war, we wouldn't be able to function.
Mhm.
And I'm a fan of military science fiction.
Okay.
But at the same time, I was thinking, why can't we have a science fiction novel or movie, kind of like Dune, but where Gandhi is the hero? Like, why does it always have to end in violence?
Mhm.
I mean, is it because we're just not entertained by anything but violence anymore? Or?
Yeah. No, it's a question. I don't want this all to revolve around my own writing, but it's a question I grapple with in the Marsco books, because they stay in power in part because they're the ones that have the goon squads. You know, they're armed and they have this sophisticated weapon that doesn't miss, or usually doesn't miss, and so there's no tanks or aircraft carrier. They don't need any of that, but it's crowd control and because they just keep everybody so desperately poor. But yeah, how do you? It's a tough question. I mean, I read a lot of World War II, World War I history. World War I was a fiasco. I mean, Europe got together and had an arms race. They were all cousins, all the kings, all the monarchies. They were almost all of them related to Queen Victoria from the 19th century. And then they never thought, they'll never fight each other. The king and the Kaiser are cousins. They grew up together, they shared a grandmother, and yet here they were, sending, and it quickly got out of control. World War II, you wonder, could we have eliminated Hitler without fighting him? These are tough questions, the anniversary of the bomb, could we have ended the war with Japan without the bomb? There's no answer to those questions because we dropped the bomb. There's no doubt that we dropped the bomb. And there's no doubt it finally worked. But I mean, even after the atomic bomb Nagasaki, there was an attempted palace coup for people that thought the emperor would keep the war going, and they were going to capture the emperor and rush him off to the countryside and keep the war going. And the United States was lining up 50 more atomic bombs for 50 more Japanese cities. I mean, we were not screwing around. We were going to end this thing with this bomb or this bomb or this bomb. And so where do you, but these are tough questions.
So you're saying that the reason why all these stories come out with scientific or military answers is because we live in a society that uses military answers?
We certainly go to that very quickly.
Because I was wondering, isn't there any examples of Gandhis anymore? Can't we have a science fiction? Dune to me was always a really good example of where there was a spiritual component.
Right.
The Star Wars tried to kind of capture it in its own way, but
and it borrows heavily from Dune.
Yeah, but they seem to have a much more intricate, complex society.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, are we never going to see another Gandhi again? Is that why we don't have that in science fiction?
Well, I mean, a large component of the civil rights movement in this country, Martin Luther King, is passive. South Africa, which has a lot of problems today, ended apartheid, which is kind of what, just a very small minority of whites running this huge country. And Nelson Mandela, who was in prison in part because he'd been part of some violent attempts to overthrow the government, Red Gandhi turned to. So there are examples, but yeah, how do you put it into print or film? And when it's so pervasive, Battlestar Galactica makes the enemy reptiles or robots. It depends on whether you're looking at the movie or looking at the book, And so, okay, that lets you off the hook. They're just robots. You can just go on destroying them. But then that's really not who we're fighting. The robots haven't risen up yet. They may, but anyway, I cut you off.
No, I just sort of jumped in. I was thinking that I think it's because happy endings aren't memorable without something to contrast them to.
Yeah.
If you break your leg and I have to amputate, there's this visible reminder of this horrific thing that happened to you. If you break your leg and I splint it and heal perfectly, everything's great. It was a bad moment in your life, but life went on. So 20 years from now, do you remember that? Do you remember that you got this help? I think that's why we have all these war movies and war stories, and because the bad stuff just
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is entertainment, and that's what I think. You know, I mean, I'm a student of especially the novel genre, and I think a novel should do more than just be entertaining. It can be, it should be. I mean, you're not going to turn the page if you're not entertained, but it should be a story that doesn't leave you, and it should be characters that don't leave you. But it's sometimes, I think, the whole shoot 'em up aspect, just for lack of a better word off the top of my head, it is just more memorable. I mean, we're not talking cowboy books here, but you know, when you think of all the cowboy movies that end with the guns, you know, and then if you've ever read or seen the movie The Oxbow Incident, and this is a gigantic spoiler for you, but the posse goes out and they catch the rustlers and they string them up, and then they go back to town and they're so happy, and the people in town go, wait a second, nobody was murdered. You hung these guys? No, wait a second, no cattle was robbed. You heard a rumor that there was a murder and a rustling, and you went and hung 3 guys, but it didn't happen. You know, I mean, and you know, I've just wrecked it for you because I mean, but that's just a powerful reminder of how. And I mean, I got all these Italian genes in me. I get all worked up. You know, it's like, well, wait, that didn't happen at all. Oh, okay, glad I wasn't on that posse. You know, so yeah, I mean, I think we just love it, humans. We love action, because if you take an action, just sitting back and thinking about things for a minute takes a little more. What about you guys? You got some other ideas, or what's your favorite stuff? What do you like to read or watch or video game?
That's why you think it doesn't mean as much when there's violence, is because violence against zombies is just kind of like, zombies are mindless. They may be symbolic of consumerism or basic drives or something, and we're defeating them. But is that why you're not a fan of zombies? Because they're not really people, so then it's just kind of mindless entertainment, kind of
like
for its own sake. It's not even
it's like
being triumphant over evil.
Yeah, it's like a video game. Yeah, you're just shooting the asteroids coming at you. Yeah, because I mean, personally, I don't think that's. I think it can be a little desensitizing to people if real people, not the characters, if whatever's coming at you, you can just with reckless abandon destroy it, and
Cost anything, you don't have to feel bad.
you don't have to feel bad, and you can feel good if you kill. It's like little boys when they step on the anthill and they're just ants, but well, that's part of the ecosystem. It's pretty complicated, and they build deeper than we do. When you kind of. So, but pardon my high moralism. So get on my high horse. As what's her name said in Downton Abbey, don't you get a little lonely up there in your high horse?
Well, my big beef with zombie films and stuff like that is it's supposed to be symbolic of the corporate consumer, which is all of us.
Yeah.
So to me, I don't like zombie because basically they're blaming us, the general, the working class, for our problems.
Yeah.
Whereas, you take a book like Dune or something like that, they talk about people who are in positions of power.
Right.
And how they're structuring and creating our society and making us live in poverty.
And manipulating it.
Well, or at least the mechanisms of control. Whereas zombie films, it's almost like corporatism is saying you can go shoot your neighbor.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They're to blame. And it's like, it doesn't really point at anybody symbolically. It doesn't point at anybody really significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't watched much outside of a couple clips at this talk that I talked to you about, where they did talk about zombies and Walking Dead and different things, And, you know, a great presentation. I mean, it's 4 professors or 5 professors that I've worked with for years. I mean, they're really, some of them are brilliant people. And I go, I didn't know they're watching on Friday night. They get a 6-pack out and a pizza and they watch The Walking Dead. You know, I'm watching Jane Austen, you know, I'm sorry. And one, the librarian, did read a little bit of Jane Austen and zombies. I realize it's supposed to be satire and high camp and everything, but it's like, not Jane Austen. You just can't destroy Jane Austen with zombies, but I guess it's a successful book, so. Anyway, one of my pet peeves. Well, just because we haven't talked about it, what about, do some of you do fantasy? I mean, because I didn't mention, the only fantasy I know is if we want to call Harry Potter fantasy, and if you want to call, well, Lord of the Rings obviously is fantasy, but I don't. I've tried reading some stuff recently, and I just can't get into it. I mean, I read one, it was an Australian writer, something about the moon was in the title, and it was all raves and everything, and I just read it after a while, and I finished it. I finished the first of 3, but it's like, you know, I'm not going on 2 or 3. And I was into Game of Thrones. I think the first one, the Game of Thrones, I mean, isn't it the Saga of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire, whatever it is? But the first book I thought was just stunning. But then all these monsters keep coming up, and then all these people that keep ending up dead, and then they disappear for a book. I just finally said, sorry, George, you're not getting any more of my cash. You know, you're. But again, this is you. If you love it, you keep watching. I mean, people tell me the movies are better. I watched I get out the DVDs out of the library, and I watched the first season, and it's a stunning film. I mean, it's a film made for TV, but that's not really a distinction anymore when you think of it. We've been watching the new Roots. We only watched the first 2 hour and 15-minute episode because we've been busy. But when you think of that as a movie that they made principally for television, just how rich and stunning, and the film techniques and the scenes on the boat were just unbelievable, you know. So, but people like fantasy. Do they read fantasy or?
Actually, I'm one of those people, you know, I'm only 22, so I was one of those people, I got into reading more through Harry Potter.
Uh-huh.
So I'm that age group, and that kind of introduced me to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And what enticed me with Harry Potter was the rich storyline, and the fact that Harry never wants violence either. He wants
Right.
to solve everything normally, but everybody around him is like, we gotta fight.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want to fight. So
No.
that I like that about him. So.
Rowling is a tremendously talented writer. I mean, yeah, I started reading them. We have a daughter who's 30, and she started reading them, and I picked the movie came out, and I wanted to see the movie, and I thought, well, I'm going to read the book before I see the movie. So I read the book, and I thought, wow, she is good. She drives characterization through dialogue better than any writer I've seen. And I mean, that's my specialty. I have a PhD in English literature. You know, so I'm not talking about, you know, I was on a bus one day and I read this book. I mean, this is my profession, and she is really skilled. She has a book for adults about teenagers called The Casual Vacancy, and it's about a death of, like, it's in England, so it's not called the city council or county commissioners, but it's that kind of a level of judicial, and they regulate, and there's a big argument on the board about whether or not to continue funding a methadone, the drug that's a substitute for heroin, and whether they would remove that clinic from this kind of a middle class neighborhood, or whether or not. So there's a big fight going on, and then this guy dies, and they have to replace him. That's all in the first book. I mean, first page. I'm not wrecking the book. It's not like 50 pages in or 100 pages in. But the teenagers in that, the stuff that they face, and, you know, their high school, and their parents. So there's a, you know, like the Harry Potter, it's mostly about teenagers, but this is, and you just realize, wow, is she a talented writer? And I'm not into murder mysteries, but I guess she's been writing these mystery stories, and people have been saying she really, really does it well. But what a phenomenon, you know. I mean, we were at conferences about writing and whatnot, where people said, that's it, writing is dead. we're never going to get kids to read again. And then Harry Potter hit. And there you are, you know. Hello. You'll find the exam under your seat for those that came in late. You may start at any time. So. Yes, I was one of those professors. I was in graduate school one time and had a seminar with one other student, the professor and two of us, and I was sick one day, and that bugger gave an exam question on the day I missed. Are you kidding me? you know, I could have been one of those professors. I didn't become one of those professors, but and that'll end up in a book someday, and that's a threat I can carry out, you know. So. But anyway, yeah, the Harry Potter and Hunger Games, and you know, the Giver. I know the Giver. I haven't read it, but I know that's very, very popular. We just saw. It more fits with the general topic I was talking about, but it's young A. Stephanie Bodine, is that her name? Does she write under S.A. Bodine? Yeah, S.A. Bodine. And she has the Compound, about after a war and there's survivors in a compound and what's that's like. And she's approaching 200,000 sales. It's like, oh, Lordy. I would love to have a book that sells 200,000. Anything else? I mean, other questions or observations?
Well, I was curious, since we were talking about dystopian
Yeah.
literature, which do you think is the best story of dystopian literature you would consider? Or the
Besides
top-
mine, of course, right? We'll
Besides-
take mine off the list.
Yeah.
1984, A Brave New World are wonderful. I love Canticle for Leibowitz. I think that one's very, very powerful. I'm trying to think of what is like recent that I really. Handmaid's Tale. It's probably it's about bless you. It's about 30 years old now, but I think that's another one that's so rich and so detailed and so reserved. Never Let Me Go was very powerful. Never Let Me Go was all first-person narration, and that is a difficult style to read because it's all told through one point of view. But Ishiguro can carry it off, the author. And his most famous book is the one about the butler, not a Room with a View, what is it? Remains of the Day. And if you don't want to read the book, but you want to see a tremendous movie, it's about 20 years old now. Anthony Hopkins plays a butler in a household right before World War II, and it's so he tells the story in the book, and in the movie it's from his point of view, and what's circling around him. But in this Never Let Me Go, you just can't kind of put your finger on what's this onksy dark thing that's going on. It takes a long time to figure it out, and then how they're dealing with it as adults, because the narrator's a woman, and she tells the story, well, this is what it was like when we were kids, and I've been doing this now for 3 years, and and it's just chilling. So those are the kind of things that I like. I do like the Star Wars movie, this last Star Wars movie. The only pet peeve I have about the last Star Wars movie is when they find Luke. You know, they filmed that on one of the most pristine areas of Ireland, on a little island right off Ireland, where monks were hermits and everything. And I'm afraid people are going to want to go to Trump over that. They only let about 20 or 30 people, maybe 40 people a day on that island, only if the weather is really, really good, because you have to go out in a small boat. And and I'm just afraid they're going to want to put a Disney, ride there or something. And it's a sacred place. I mean, you're there and you realize these people were there for 400 or 500 years, living. I mean, you look one way, you see Ireland. You look the other way. Well, the next stop is Canada, but it's way over the horizon, And that they could have filmed that anywhere, and nobody would have. But that's a good movie. So, I will be talking at 8:45 in Executive 2, so I don't know where that is.
It's that way.
That way, okay. You're the fountain of all wisdom.
You know where e-gaming and anime center is? It's right next to that.
Okay. And I do talk a little bit more on there about the process of self-publishing. I am a self-published author, self-promoting, and talk about Read Local, which is a group that we have in Marshall that is trying to promote writers, not just, I'm one of the few sci-fi writers in the group, but a lot of local history, a lot of cookbooks, a lot of not kid book, but for younger adults. There's 2 or 3 Vietnam vets that have written their experiences, but we're all kind of self-published, kind of trying to get a community of people reading local writers. So I'm going to talk about that and just a little bit more about my journey that brought me to being a writer and different things. So in my world, ND stands for Notre Dame, not North Dakota, so I'll talk a little bit about the Notre Dame experience and different things like that. But so that's coming up. And if you're interested, I do have books for sale. If you want to talk a little bit more about books or books writings, we got a few minutes, but do you want to add anything?
You're talking about current movies, 2 movies that we watched recently, not movies, but a movie and a TV show, The Martian and Humans.
Oh, Humans, yeah.
Humans is good.
Humans,
Isn't that
yeah.
great?
It is, yes.
I have a character who's Asian, and I want, Anita's her name, right? And then she's got a different name. I want that actress to play, Chen is her name in my book. And then,
The Martians.
and The Martian was very good. Again, hard to read in a way because so much of it is first person. It's just him talking into, making this recording. And then it breaks into, the book breaks into some third person passages to talk about what's going on Earth and what's going on in the other spaceship. The movie does, I think, a really good job of that. And saving Matt Damon. How many times do we have to save Matt Damon? You know how many millions we've spent saving this guy? Omaha Beach. I don't know. But yeah, that's a good one. So show your
I'm wearing a Marsco.
Marsco shirts.
Part
These
of
are a
the-
gift from our daughter, who's teaching English in Sweden right now, and a couple Christmases ago she made these shirts for us. So that's okay. It's a cosplay place. So somebody stopped us one time at a different conference. We were walking in there. Who are you guys? Well, I'm Tessa. I'm Zot, which are the 2 main characters. So anyway, sorry about that. But anything else? Anyone? Shall I dismiss class?
Say something about your books that you,
Pardon me?
say something about your books.
Well, the Marsco Dissident, I'm going to do a presentation at 8:45. But the Marsco Dissident, Marsco's a gigantic corporation. You can't really see the picture from back there, but if you see the hand on the one that's Mars behind it, there's implants in the fingertips, and that's what runs the computers. You can put a thimble on a hand and run some computers, but that's going to give you less computer power. And the more discs you have, the more important you are, so much so that eventually they'll put them on your left hand and you become a lefter, then you're really powerful. And Marsco took over because of plagues and diseases, and a big war broke out. And Marsco is like this multinational corporation, and so they decide that they'll run the earth for a while and then turn it back to democracy or turn it back to governments. And they've been in power for 25 years, and they kind of like this gig. And so obviously there's a dissident. It's the Marsco Dissident. And I named him, yeah, Walter Miller is the name of the main dissident, and his daughter Tessa, and then Zot Grzati. But getting there, Mary. I chose the name of the character based on the author of The Canticle for Leibowitz. I love that book so much. And I read that, I was about 19. And from a little kid, I want to be a sci-fi writer, but in college, I just thought, I don't know why I can't do this. And I also wanted to be a professor, so I got to do one, and then I started writing the other. But then, they grew very quickly. There's 4 of them. 2 of them are published. I'm working on book 3. And then book 4 is a prequel. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about them tonight, but I started looking at book 3, and I want to have book 3 out by the end of next summer. So I've got the 4 of them written, and then I have probably 6 other books or irons in the fire, and one with a pirate planet. I do, but that's about an empire, and I don't want to say too much, but there's a group of people that want the empire to be more of a parliamentarian monarch, so a figurehead in a parliament, and then there's another group that want to replace the emperor with their own guy, and they just want to be even more emperor than the emperor. And it's all these, there's more solar systems and space travel. Mars goes all in our solar system. So there's colonies on Mars, and the moon, Mars, and as far out as the asteroid belt. And they use hibernation to get out there. So there's a group of characters that are hibernation specialists that put people to sleep for several months so that they don't need to bring water and food on these spaceships to get them out there. So there's a whole element of science kind of, but it's fun. I've had a hoot. I mean, 10 years ago I couldn't have envisioned I'd be sitting in a ballroom in Fargo, North Dakota talking about my science fiction. I really thought I would write one book, hit it big, retire from teaching, and buy my daughter, when she got her license, a red truck. She wanted a red truck. So it didn't happen. It didn't happen that way.
What made you choose to go to a prequel in the 4th book?
In the first 2 books, Walter Miller's talking about writing the history of Marsco and how it rose to power, and he gives it a title, The Ascendancy of Marsco. So as I'm writing book 1 and book 2, I'm thinking, well, I got to write book 3. I've already got the title, I already know what it is. And so then I had a leave, and I thought, okay, I got several months I'm not teaching, I'm going to write this book. And I'll talk about, again, more about it tonight, but I decided to write it very experimentally. So there's like 14 or 15 narrators. The first 3 books, they're not being published in the order they were written, because they were written 1, 2, 4, 3, and I'm publishing them in a different order. But the first 3 books, when they're done, book 1, 2, and 3, are like Harry Potter. It's a third-person narration. There's an exterior voice telling us the story, and I can jump from character to character to character and focus on different characters. Okay, end of English professor lecture. Now, book 4 has like 14 or 16 narrators. So I have a guy who volunteers to be part of this auxiliary unit, which is sort of a quasi-armed, not police, but more than police, not army, but less than army. And he's a pretty violent goon, and he's explaining why he volunteered. And then, so first person. Then I have this woman who was like I call it the content provider. She was the pretty face on TV to tell us things, and she's looking back on her life, and she tells, so there's a documentary about how she rose to fame, and then her saying, oh, that documentary was all BS. Let me tell you what really happened. And then there's her suicide note. So there's like 3 different pieces of, so the whole thing is purposely broken, distorted, fragmented, because nobody can tell the history of a 40-year period with like clarity. And so I purposely wanted to break that all up. And so, I mean, the greatest thing about writing is you just get to play. I mean, writing is the biggest sandbox in the world, So I have a book that's, and I've got quite extensive notes. That's when I know it's a real book. I write notes about the characters. I write little scene scenarios. I have kind of an outline. I love Jane Austen, and there's all these Jane Austen retellings, And so I'm retelling, I hope to, Pride and Prejudice. Only all the men are officers, and they all fight at Waterloo. And so Wickham and Darcy and all these guys are off, so I'm just having fun with it. And then I have a different sci-fi series, the one with the pirate planet, as I said, with this huge, very strong emperor and all the kind of connections that has. And I wanted the science accurate, so I talked to one of our physics professors, Ken Murphy. I said, Ken, what, all this dark matter, dark space, tell me a little bit about it. He goes, why should I tell you about it? We don't know anything about it. He goes, invent it, you're probably going to be right. So I want, instead of hibernation, because I've milked that in the Marsco stories, and they're just going to be able to get into these black holes and just zip from solar system to solar system. And he said, yeah, it's probably going to happen. Why not? Stick it in there. You know, so it's a minor. The science of my books is not as important as, so it's going to be a little bit more military. Some of the main, and I do like, what is it, David Drake writes all those? Was it on Basilisk Station? Is that his?
David Weber.
That's David Weber. And then there is a David Drake that has the RNC, whatever. I love those, you know, but they're like candy, you know, and oh, there's going to be a villain, we're going to destroy a fleet, and, you know, and then it's over, you know, but they're fun, why not, you know? Don't want to live your life like that. But anyway, to answer your question, I hope that, I don't think Marsco will go beyond 4 books, yeah.
You wanna mention the glossary?
Oh yeah, it's a pretty technical book, so I invent a lot of terms, so there is a glossary at the back. It is available on Kindle if you like Kindle. The Marsco Dissident's $2.99 on Kindle. It's $4.99 for the Marsco Triumphant. And
Reviews online?
and there's reviews online. It's on the Kirkus Reviews. If you go to their website and just put in Zarzana, it pops up. They had a very, very favorable review. The San Francisco Review of Books, and they had been offline. They had a major crash in their system, and they just emailed me and said they're back online. And I haven't looked for it there, so I don't know. But it's probably the same thing. You go to their website, and then plug in Zarzana, and it pops up. I have to laugh because I paid money to have the San Francisco Review of Books review my books, and the address they gave me to mail the check and the books was on J Street in Sacramento, and I grew up on 3rd Avenue. It was like a mile from my house. It's like Sacramento, San Francisco. But I guess if they call it the Sacramento Review of Books, it's. And then, yeah, I'm working on getting the Marsco Triumphant reviewed by them, and Blue Ink. I'm going to get it reviewed by Blue Ink because both of them. It just I'll talk about this tonight, but it's a life to be a self-promoting writer because this is why I retired. I mean, from teaching, and so. But it's fun. I get to do gigs like this. So. Did you have anything I'm missing? $20 if you want a paperback, and I'll sign it. 2 for $35. American money. Can't take Canadian or Klingon. Here, I guess it would be pieces of 8, right? Yeah. What's pirate money? Yeah. And you don't have to come up and say "arg" to buy a book. But. Well, thank you so much. For those of you that drifted in late, I started out by telling the story. We came to the opening meeting in this room, and it was standing room only last night. And I realized I was supposed to be in this room in the morning, and I thought, holy crap! You know, if I have to talk to this many people, and because I did want this kind of informal, and I hope I didn't sound too pompous. And tonight is going to be fun because I do have slides, and it's a PowerPoint.
And it's not a big room. It's
Oh,
not
good.
like a huge room. It's a nice, more intimate room.
Okay, well, it'll be standing room only, I'm sure.
There you go.
Yeah, you'll all put this on your Facebook. You'll all say, oh, go here, Zarzana. This guy has got his shit together. And now I'm going to go to Panera's and get a fika. We were in Sweden for 2 weeks. Our daughter teaches, and we learned a great word, fika. And the Swedes love to get their cup of coffee and their sweet roll about 2-3 times a day. They're kind of like hobbits, you know? And so fika, they love their, and I saw, yeah, it's coffee fika is what. And Swedish is really English with a different pronunciation, so that the people we know that are teaching English over there. So, anyway, thank you so much. Hope to see you later. Go discover pirate. It's still hard for me to say pirate booty. I'm sorry. Pirate treasures, you know. Or, thank you so much. You've been a very, very nice audience. Yeah.